Karen, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
So I say Karen, but really it's Dr. Karen Darke MBE, and it's a true honor and privilege to be able to have you on the show because you are an incredible human being, and we're going to be hearing a bit about just some of the many things that you've accomplished. But one of the things that I've always found so inspiring is people that go on and do incredible things, which you've done many. But what I also find particularly interesting is that not only have you been such an inspiration for so many other people, you've won medals for our country and for our nation, but then you've also got a very sort of academic understanding of various personal development modalities.
Probably a bit like you, I'm fairly obsessed with learning and with personal development. So yeah, it's a never-ending learning journey.
And I love that. I completely agree with you. It's a never-ending journey. But it's the way you apply those lessons, and you've really applied them to the nth degree. So yeah, it's going to be a really fascinating conversation. So for people that maybe aren't so familiar around sort of who you are and what you've done, let's go into a little bit about the story of how things started out for you. And then we can sort of go on to some of the incredible accomplishments and achievements that you've had and some of the challenges you've had along the way. So you started out literally mining for gold, right? In terms of sort of seeking out the gold in life, but as a geologist.
From a geological perspective, yeah. But I think even before that, one of the things that happened when I was a teenager that was really fundamental, I think, in creating my outlook on life was going on a youth expedition with an organisation called the Yorkshire Schools Exploring Society. And I just went to my local comp school. I didn't come from a rich family, but there was a poster on the wall at school advertising this expedition to China, which in 1988 seemed, really exotic and really far away. And it was to take a journey in the remote part of Western China. And I instantly saw that poster and dismissed myself. It's like, I haven't got any money, I can't do that. And luckily, I've always had really supportive, positive parents. And I had a couple of friends who decided they would apply to go on this kind of selection weekend. So they convinced me to apply and go on the weekend. They got selected. I felt overwhelmed by the amount of money I had to raise and the level of fitness I would need for the journey. So I selected to be in a team that would be mountain biking in this very remote part of, the middle of nowhere in Western China, basically. And yeah, I think that's where my journey began, realizing that if the first time I got on a mountain bike when I was 15, and I rode it around the field at the back of my mum and dad's house in Yorkshire, and I literally thought I was going to die. I was so unfit, my lungs were exploding. And I think the journey was a few £1,000s, which then was a lot more, obviously. And that felt really intimidating. So that whole year became about training, following routines, getting a job to raise money to go, part-time job, and being part of a team. You didn't want to let the team down. So every time we had a training weekend, you didn't want to be the one who was holding everybody back. So that was a great incentive to train. So I think that kind of philosophy and approach to life has just been imbued in me since then, really. And it's kind of defined everything I've done since.
And I'm just going to name some of the things that you've done for people that are listening to this right now. So, I mean, you've won Paralympic medals, you've skied across ice caps, you've kayaked extreme parts of the globe, you've hand cycled across mountain ranges, you've climbed El Capitan just using your hands, basically, which for people that are listening to this, you might have heard of the film Free Solo. And I believe I'm right in saying, for those people that have got Macs for years, I'm pretty sure even right now, my Mac, the background has changed. But I used to have the background. It was El Capitan. It was the mountain. I've looked at that mountain for months at a time, every single day. And you've climbed that huge piece of rock as well. So there's some incredible things that you've done. Was that journey that trip that you had when you were younger, did that ignite something in you to want to go and explore more? Because you were saying it was something you didn't sort of really want to do at first, or was
I think,
it that?
I think it must have started much younger. My parents have always taken us abroad. They were both teachers. We had long holidays. We would go to Europe and we would just camp for 5 or 6 weeks and hike in the Alps and lie on beaches in the Mediterranean as well. But, we've always kind of been a fairly adventurous family. And when I was a kid, I used to moan and groan and, oh, it's a Sunday, I don't want to go for the family walk. But I think that all that kind of stuff where all our holidays were spent in exploring places. So I have got this spirit that I can't not find out what's around the next corner. It's kind of like I would never turn back. I would always go to the end of the road and see the final view, and I was always intrigued and curious to know where things are going to lead. So yeah, I think that's what's created it.
And I think that intrigue and curiosity is what leads so many people down the route of personal development as well. A lot of people that will be listening to this that are maybe business owners or high performers, ambitious professionals, sports people that are looking to get to the next level. It's that curiosity, that thirst for learning and growing themselves that takes them to that next level. So you've sort of having that adventurous upbringing, you then decided to get into geology and be involved.
I actually started out studying medicine, and then I kept walking past the geology department, and I had a fascination with volcanoes because when I was 10, my mum and dad swapped jobs and houses, and we lived in America for a year, and it was the year that Mount St. Helens exploded, or the year after. So we went and saw Mount St. Helens in all its devastation, all of the trees flattened and the lava fields. And I think we went to Yellowstone National Park. So I think that just created this fascination with volcanic activity and geology. So that's why I wanted to study it. So I left medicine behind after about 4 months and got into rocks, became a rock doctor instead in the end.
A rock doctor. And it wasn't so much, so you're thinking, right, I'm gonna find gold, I'm going mining for gold. Then it was the fascination around
No, it was volcanoes actually that got me really interested. And in the end, I never really worked with volcanoes, but yeah, that was my initial excitement.
And and then in terms of so you're researching into gold and you went and moved to.
So when I was studying gold, I ended up doing a PhD in gold geology, and it was all based in the Bolivian Andes. Mm-hmm. So just a few weeks before I was due to go there for the first time, I fell off a cliff rock climbing in Scotland, and that's how I became paralyzed from the chest down. So everything got delayed for a year because obviously when you become paralyzed, it usually takes about 5 months or so in hospital to recover and learn how to live again, because you're basically kind of wiping the slate clean, and it's almost like going back to being a child and having to learn everything from scratch, how to manage your bladder, your bowels, your temperature control, how to move, because when you're paralyzed from the chest down, learning to move is obviously a bit of an issue in terms of getting in and out of a bed or a car or your wheelchair. So that was a hugely steep learning curve for 5 or 6 months, and then I returned back after that to pick up the geology and found myself out in Bolivia in a wheelchair looking at things through a very different perspective.
Yeah, so I want to talk about that different perspective, and we spoke just before we started recording about the moment that you fell off this cliff and you sort of just dropped that, oh yeah, I just fell off a cliff in Scotland, but I mean, like, life altering day moment, and you were sort of was it 4 days that you were?
I think I was unconscious for 3 or 4 days, and then I was in intensive care for a month, and then I was flown. And I am so lucky because there's so many countries in the world where if you had the accident I had, there's no way you would be alive. But I had the most incredible care from the British, from the NHS. I was flown in a medical plane from intensive care in Scotland down to a specialist spinal hospital in Yorkshire because my family were there. And I think they even closed the M1 to get the ambulance to go down because my neck was also broken. So I had an unstable fracture in my neck, which would have meant, if that went, I would have lost the function in my arms and my hands. So they literally shut the motorway, and they'd actually circled any potholes on the road with chalk, the police, so that the ambulance could make sure it didn't go over any bumps between the airport and the hospital, just to keep my neck stable, which, if you think about that level of care, it is inspiring. Like, I'm so lucky to receive that.
So uh, what I really want to delve into here, and I'm very curious, like you, is what that moment you come round 3-4 days after that event, which you don't remember, and I don't think you still remember.
I mean, you kind of I've pieced it together in my mind, but you're not quite sure how much of it's real and how much of it you just kind of filled in with other people telling you things. So
Yeah.
yeah, I don't really remember it.
That moment that you wake up and you realize that you're paralyzed from the chest down, what was going through your mind?
Yeah, I mean, I think the body, the body is very intelligent and everything's connected. So on some level, even though I'd been unconscious and nobody had actually told me I was paralyzed, when they told me, it's not like a huge shock. It's kind of, it sounds strange, probably facilitated a little bit by some fairly powerful diamorphine that was in my body, I do believe. But I think the real shock wasn't initial. I think when we have a big shock in life, it's too much, isn't it? So the trauma, as you probably know, goes into that part of our limbic brain because it's too overwhelming. We can't process it all, and it's somewhere in the cells of our body. So the hardest point for me was when I was moved to a spinal injuries hospital, and suddenly I saw people in wheelchairs, and I wasn't being given any painkiller diamorphine things anymore. So the pure clarity of the situation really hit home. And I had a really, and I don't mean this to sound trite, but I had a really, really hard week where being asleep was a dream come true. I would have memories of being in mountains, and I was living my old life very vividly in my dreams, and then I would wake up and reality was like the nightmare that you woke up in a hospital and you can't walk and you can't do anything and you're in this place. So and I don't mean to sound trite, but I do only remember it being really, really bad for a week. And then it's like, well, you just have to, I suppose I have this philosophy that we have, what choice do we have? Like our life is what we choose to create. So I'm alive and I don't want to sit around being miserable my whole life. So I just decided that I needed to tackle it in a more positive way, and gradually started to focus on what I could do, not on what I couldn't do. Friends came in to visit me and they knew what my nature was, so they would bring information about how you could learn to sit ski in a wheelchair, so that before I was even getting out of bed, we'd already booked a trip to the Alps to go and learn to sit ski. So and I also lost a very, very close friend in a climbing accident 3 months after my accident, and that was an extra big kick up the backside to go, you're here, you're alive, he's not, you just have to make the most of what you've got. So, and that doesn't mean it was an easy process. It doesn't mean that you're instantly super positive and loving it all at all. But I do remember that first year after my accident, just making a decision that I would grieve when I was like in my flat on my own at night. I went back to Scotland where I was a student. I carried on my studies and I would cry a lot. But whenever I opened the curtains in the morning, that was kind of like the trigger to be okay. And I think my saying at the time was fake it till you make it. And I've since come across a lovely saying. It's one of my favorites. It's if your face is swollen from the severe beatings of life, smile and pretend to be a fat man. And it's a Nigerian proverb. But that I realized that's basically what I did. And I kind of believe that, when you, I'm not suggesting that any of us should be fake and inauthentic, but I also think that we have to limit the kind of poor me part of it and actually just embrace what is. So that's what I did. So when I went out in the daytime and I felt unhappy inside, but I just kept forcing myself to do it and programming my brain to keep doing things and trying things and expanding this world of possibility. And I think eventually, one day I realized that, oh, actually, this is okay. I don't feel unhappy anymore. And that's kind of only ever increased ever since, the more that I've learned about the mind and the body and our emotions and our ability to change our reality.
And that's again something that I've been obsessed with for years now, is the ability to change your reality and the difference between reality and actuality, and what you then went on and did as a result of that. So it's just truly inspirational. So in terms of order, because there was so many, and there has been so many things that you went on and did and have done since that accident, including the Paralympics, which we'll talk about. what was the first big sort of
So
outlet for you?
when I was in hospital, because I'd broken my neck, I had metal bolts in my head right here, and I was in traction with weights hanging off the back of my head, sort of keeping my neck in traction. And I was just looking up at ceiling tiles for the first 3 months or so. And some friends came in and they stuck up posters of the Himalayas on the ceiling, thinking they were doing me a favor. And at the time, it didn't feel like a favor because I was just looking at these mountains thinking, I can't go there anymore. And it kind of made me feel really sad. But actually, the more I looked at them, the more I started to dream. And I just had this dream of going to the Himalayas. So as a geologist and a climber, I'd always wanted to go to the Himalayas. But I also knew really strongly that I have little interest in traveling to places where you're not really interacting with the outdoor environment. You know, you're not in the rawness of nature and meeting the people in a real kind of way. So my dream was to go to the Himalayas and cycle across them. So I obviously didn't think of this originally when I was in hospital, because that would have been way too far-fetched. I was focused on how do you pull your trousers up when you're sat on your ass all the time, and much more simplistic things. But when I left the hospital and I had a special hand cycle made that you pedal with your arms, and it was a tandem actually, so 2 seats, pedal with your arms at the front, the legs at the back. So, and I just dreamt of this journey through the Himalayas, and I started to get books and research and found information out about the Karakoram Highway and the old Silk Route running from Central Asia. So 3 years later, we flew to Kazakhstan and cycled into Kyrgyzstan, and then across a range of mountains called the Tian Shan Mountains into Kashgar in Western China, and then along the Karakoram Highway across the Himalayas down into Pakistan. And that was the first totally life transforming journey.
Incredible, absolutely incredible. You mentioned vision a few times, and you mentioned the pictures that your friends put on the ceiling, which, like you say, at the time felt like it wasn't doing you any favors. How powerful a part has vision and using visualization played in you achieving the accomplishments that you have?
All of it. Clearly not all of it. I can't put a percentage on it, but a huge part of it. So my process is, I call it having a wibber. So I've invented the word, and a wibber is a wouldn't it be amazing? So I have a wibber, and it seems totally far-fetched. I just think, no way. And then it's like, yes way, how can we make this happen? And usually I feel completely intimidated by it, and really, full of all the things that could go wrong. And like everyone, I see all of the barriers and the hurdles and the impossibility of it. And then I just love unpicking that. And I do that by a logical process of working through all the barriers that I see and thinking, what can I do every day to do a little bit towards that? Or how can I change my thinking to help that? Or is there something practical I need to do to reduce that fear, or change things so I'm doing it in a safer way? And then I connect that with just keeping the vision. So when I was younger and I didn't really know about all of this vision stuff, like I didn't have any of the theory. Now that I've studied, I kind of know all the theory, and it's really interesting for me because when I learn theory, it's like I already know it, but only through practice. And then it's like, there's a theory about that.
It's so funny you said it. So I remember the first personal development book I ever read was a book called The Secret, which, if people are watching this on YouTube, you can kind of see behind me. And I read it. I was about 18 years old, and I'd achieved some stuff by 18, and I read it, and I thought, I've been doing this same as you. And then I was like, right, well, that makes sense. And I kind of connected the dots backwards. I've been doing this. So then I applied it more moving forward to use it more consciously to create some of the things that I wanted to create. It's a good indicator, at least, isn't it? When you're reading something, I'm already doing this, and you were doing that.
Yeah, and you know what? I've come to realize that I don't think it has to be something that you are working on every single day. Like, clearly, to win a gold medal in the Paralympics, I did consciously visualize that every day for 2 years. I bought gold shoes, I had a gold mug, a gold phone cover. Like, I just did stuff to really keep feeding my brain those messages. But there's other things where it's even like just and I'm not sure what's at work here, something more mysterious in the universe or in our bodies, but I'll just have a thought, a single thought, and years later it comes true, or the next day it comes true. Or even without working it, if that makes sense. It's kind of just a really connected thought or feeling. And then you just think, oh, and don't even think about it again. And then suddenly it's manifested.
That's what you've just said there is, and you said thought and feeling. It's, I believe, when the thought and the feeling are connected. So we're going to be talking about head and heart a bit later on, but that head and heart, that's when stuff can be brought into you. People talk about the law of attraction and like the magnetic thing. And I think about it all the time. It doesn't happen, but if you're not feeling it, I remember about 4 years ago, I woke up, I was working from home that day, and that evening I'd had this I had this dream. I don't normally dream. I know people say you dream every night, but I don't normally dream. And I had this really super vivid dream of meeting Tony Robbins, who is my idol and has been since 2013, in a hotel. And it was so vivid. I got on the call with my client and I said to them, I've got to tell you this, because if this happens, no one will ever believe me saying that I've dreamt it. And I said it to this woman. I said, you're not. 2 months later, I get an invitation to be a personal guest of Tony and his wives to fly to Vegas, stay in a hotel, and do one of his courses.
Wow, how did you get that invite? That's amazing.
It's just a bit of a story, but and that exact image of him looking down, chatting to me, because he's a big guy, I'm not a big guy, was the exact image that I saw. It's just crazy, and for most people, they go, "That's a load of rubbish. I wouldn't believe, like that's not gonna." That's not going to happen. It's so true. So I can definitely empathize with you.
I think there's other examples. Well, that's a bit like your example there, where you can't really explain it. It's just something that. So when I climbed El Capitan years later after my accident, I didn't tell my mum and dad I was going to do it. I think partly because I didn't want them to worry, and partly because I didn't believe I was going to do it. I kind of thought, well, maybe, but we'll probably just end up, tripping around California for a while because it seems so far fetched. And then after I'd done it and got back to Britain, I told my parents, and that my mum was like, "That is incredible." Because when you were 10 and we'd lived in America for the year, she said I remember that we'd been to Yosemite National Park and we'd seen El Capitan, but I had no recollection that as a 10-year-old, I'd apparently looked up at it, looked at the climbers on it, and said, "I'm going to climb that one day." Wow. Had no idea I'd said that, but she remembered it vividly. It's like, wow, that's pretty weird. How did that come about?
Wow.
So that's mysteries of the world.
So climbing El Capitan, you've then skied across ice caps.
Yeah, so I mean, there's been a lot, and the order. I think I can remember the order, but that's kind of irrelevant. But yeah, I've had a lot of adventures, and I just have this adventurous spirit. And every time the opportunity comes up, I feel that fear like anybody would. I'm human. I'm not superhuman, and it's just this process. And we talked about working through it. So I think one of the next big ones. Well, I've done about 4 trips now, cycling across different parts of the Himalayas. So I've been there a few times. And one of the next big ones was sea kayaking from Vancouver all the way to a place called Juneau in Alaska, which was basically 10 weeks of kayaking on the water. And to do that meant leaving my wheelchair behind. And I told my partner at the time that I had this dream. He's like, "Oh, let's just make it happen." And then he invited someone else to come, and the next guy he invited to come was also paralyzed in a wheelchair. And I'm like, well, this is no good. We've got 2 of us that can't walk and only 1 person that can. This is like the worst team ever. So it grew from there, and we ended up with a team of, I think, 9 of us in the end, just friends and friends of friends. And we all flew out to Vancouver. And yeah, we just left the 2 wheelchairs behind, put them on a ferry to be taken up the coast. Hopefully we'd find them a month later. In the end, we never got them that month later. But that was hugely challenging, because the concept of, leaving behind that independence. And we just slept on beaches, on the logs on the beaches, and lived with the tides and the rhythms of nature. And it was an incredible journey. I look back and I can't believe we did it. Like, how is that possible? But it's amazing what's possible when we just put our mind on it and we work together as a team, and incredible things come about.
I wanted to. We covered the kayaking, we've covered the mountain range, we covered El Capitan, and then the ice cap as well. So skiing across that. So was that again something? Well, all of these things, by the way, something you just think I've got an idea. That seems cool. Or is it you think, right, I need to push myself to the next limit and I need to
None of that. It's none of those things. It's kind of just where life takes me. And so a lot of people say to me things like, oh, what's your next plan? And I'm like, well, I don't really. Sometimes I have one, but often I don't. It's just that I meet someone, something happens, I'm like, oh wow, that would be cool. So kayaking, I met someone who'd done that journey in a sea kayak, and I just thought, wow, that would be really cool. And then I mentioned to someone, they went, well, why don't we just make it happen, and blah blah blah. Greenland happened totally as a shock. So I have a friend who married a guy from northern Lapland in Finland. We went over there one New Year to spend a week with them, and I learned to cross-country ski, which is like a really tight-fitting sit ski mounted on 2 cross-country skis. It's like the worst sport ever. It's the most miserable time, because the only way I can move is to put double poles in the ground and pull with all my effort, and you move about an inch. It's kind of the most unrewarding activity. And the way that this ski was designed, I couldn't stop it or turn it, so I just fell over a lot. When I'm paralyzed from the chest, so below there, I can't regulate my body temperature, so my blood vessels don't constrict and dilate. So I basically spent the whole holiday freezing cold. It was pitch black nearly the whole time. It was miserable. And at the end of the trip, my friend's husband said, that was very good. Now we try something harder. And he was like Mr. Hardcore Iceman. And he suggested that we should ski across Greenland together. And I'm just like, what? You are kidding. That is crazy. And just honestly just thought it was the most out there thing ever, and was petrified of it, and also not really that excited about it because it had been a fairly miserable holiday. But when I got home, I kind of sat with it and thought, my goodness, can you imagine being completely in wilderness? Because that's not something you get to do very often in a wheelchair. You're always near roads or buildings or something. And I thought I would love that experience of just being in total wilderness for that time. So yeah, it was another journey, 35 days. So we started on the east, skied west, and most people take about a month. So we planned for 35 days, and then you need all of your food with you for that time, all of the fuel to melt the ice, because that's how you drink, to last. And we have to do it in 35 days. There was no option. If we didn't, we'd run out of fuel, food, everything. So that was an amazing journey, because to be that strict, that there's no get out clause. You have a deadline. If you don't make the deadline, you're going to starve or freeze or something. And realistically, if there's an incident on the ice that is the most likely kind of incident where you're going to get into trouble, it will be a big storm. And when there's a big storm, there's no you're not going to get rescued. So it felt really next level to me. Along with all the challenges of my disability, so hypothermia, more likelihood of frostbite, not feeling my body below there, and just stuff, which is very one of the biggest reasons people in my situation probably don't do adventures, because there's the toilet like normal, so there's all these issues about how you're going to do these things, get a frostbitten bum sat out there for an hour. So there was tons of little problems to work around. So many that I nearly dropped out just 2 weeks before we went, because it just felt overwhelming. But it was a life-changing journey, really was transformational. I've never been on a month's silent retreat, but it felt a bit like I imagine going and living in the Himalayas with some monks for a month and not speaking, because it was that remote. And
I mean, you've got one hell of a set of friends. Oh yeah, let's go and ski the ice. Let's go kayaking from Alaska. Like, I mean, the ideas they come up with and is just incredible. Quick fire round with regards to all the adventures that you've had. What's been your favourite?
Oof, I honestly can't say it. They're so different and so varied that I don't have a favourite. They're all stand out for different reasons.
Okay.
Sorry.
What one was the most challenging?
The most physically challenging was crossing Greenland, definitely. 12 hours a day, super intense on my arms and shoulders, on my hands, like gripping ski poles every day. There were mornings when I woke up and I couldn't even open them. I had to get my friend to like peel my hand open and then kind of get the blood going, get the tendons working. So physically that was really out there. Mentally, climbing El Capitan, just because I had so much residual fear of probably, you know, trauma from having had a climbing accident. And I think facing that fear and going back to that environment just brought it right up. So I was, you know, I was crying a lot. There was a lot of emotion around it. And I really had to go deep inside and work with my brain to change stuff there and then. Because again, when you're committed, climbing a rock face, it took us 5 days to climb it. So you're sleeping up there, you're tied onto the ledge. Yeah, like out there mentally in terms of that process.
Incredible. And then if that wasn't enough, you know, I mean, that from anyone's life adventures and challenges is one hell of an adventure, but we couldn't possibly not talk about winning gold.
So, I mean, my Paralympic career was really unexpected. I basically had been on a sea kayaking holiday in Sweden in 2008, damaged the skin on my bum because I can't feel it and I'd sat in the kayak too long, and ended up laid on my tummy for a month, and it coincided with the Beijing Paralympics being on television. So I watched a bit of it, and it was the first time hand cycling had ever been in a Paralympic Games. And I just looked at it and I thought, wouldn't it be amazing to try and do that in a Games?
That wibber gets you in so much trouble, doesn't it?
Yeah, it gets me into a lot of trouble. So yeah, the next Paralympics I knew was in London, and I'd never wanted to go to the Paralympics because I wasn't interested in pushing around an athletics track or swimming down a swimming pool. It's just not my thing. But when I saw hand cycling, it's like, oh, okay, I reckon I could get quite into that. So I just began this 4-year journey. And honestly, I was fit because I went riding every day, but there's a difference between being fit and then being an Olympic fit. And if I, you know, that thing where if you knew now what you knew then, or whatever way around it goes, you would never begin it. You know, it was much more of an intense journey than I ever expected. It was way harder physically than I ever expected, and it was different to other things because other things I'd done had a shorter time scale of, you know, a few months or 6 months or 1 year, but suddenly you're in a 4-year cycle aiming for something that's way in the distance that seemed totally impossible. So yeah, when I started racing, I was lapped multiple times by people. Even the finish line wouldn't exist anymore. I was so bad. So that was really about a shift in identity for me and going, how can you become something new that your mind isn't telling you you are? If that makes sense. So my mind was like, you are not an athlete. You are not an athlete. And I thought, I have to change that story and I have to start believing that that is possible. So it was kind of about identity shift.
And on that note, because you've also gone and studied as well, because as if you haven't done enough already, you've also then gone and studied the likes of counselling, clinical counselling. You've studied hypnotherapy, and I'm right in saying you've got diplomas in those areas. Yeah,
I went back and did some masters in like sort of high performance psychology and a thing called development training. So all kind of about the human development journey. So I'm just always, I think when we experience a trauma in life, it is a huge trigger to get interested in the process of human transformation. So the people that I know that are obsessed with personal development and transformation, like you and I, we've either stepped into that field at a very young age, or we've taken on a challenge that's really big, that's got us really interested in, well, how do you get to be better at this? Or something's happened to you that's kicked your ass big time and has made you kind of go dig deep and go, okay, what do we do about this? So there's usually some kind of trigger that takes us on this journey. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. Significant emotional event that sort of changes the trajectory of how things move forward. So
yeah, but it sounds like for you though that you just naturally gravitated toward this when you were 13, you said.
Well, you said, yes and no. I mean, the thing for me, and as I've shared on previous episodes, was that I grew up with a belief that money equaled happiness. And I've got an uncle that's a billionaire, an uncle that's a multimillionaire, and my dad used to work in London. He used to work hard and did what he did, but he hated his job. And one day he left home and went and set up a business with one of my uncles. That didn't happen, and he ended up having what I call significant feelings of depression, slept in a separate room, and I just connected the dots and went, Uncle Mark, he's a billionaire, he's really happy. Uncle Steve, he's a multi-millionaire, he's really happy. Dad, when he worked in London, all right, he was stressed and frustrated, but he's a lot happier than he is now. It's obvious money equals happiness. So I went off on that tangent to earn as much money as I could, as early as I could. And then it was only after having sort of been financially quite successful 8 years ago at a Tony Robbins event, which is what it all links in, when I had what I call my lightning moment. I realized that my driver for money wasn't what it was really about. It was to do with my dad, how my dad didn't achieve what he was truly capable of, in my opinion, and the impact that had on him and my family and me and a whole host of other people. And I vowed I don't want anyone else to have to go through the suffering that he went through and arguably we went through as a result of not doing that. And that's what took me off on that trajectory. So it was that significant drive. And it's still that innate drive, that energy that fuels me every day to want to be able to do those things and do it for myself, but then obviously inspire other people to do the same. And that's I can empathize. You know, most people, like you've exactly said, they've had some sort of trauma, whatever that trauma. I mean, my trauma was a very, very light trauma in the sense of trauma. Some people have gone through some tremendous trauma, physical trauma, mental trauma that they've had. Obviously, your accident was one of those truly traumatic accidents. Mine wasn't that, but it was that unraveling and becoming conscious of what was really at the root cause that for me is like this renewable energy source that just fuels me every day. And that's what I've become obsessed with, you know, and yeah, it keeps me going.
Well, I had a revelation when I was working as a geologist that I kind of went into this office every day, and everyone, it was full of really lovely, amazing people, but it felt like something was squashed out of people when they were in that building. I remember having this feeling or this image in my mind that it was like a huge blanket had been thrown over the building and everyone was kind of suffocating. And I was like, I have to get out. I have to do something different with my life. Like I'm young, I'm in a wheelchair, but maybe I'm not going to have this forever. So I need to go and live. So I suppose I've always been very motivated by lived experience and never motivated by money. But it has been interesting going onto Clubhouse recently and entering this world of people who've made a lot of money and not really being led by that. But I've noticed that I've had a frustration that I've learned so much and I've experienced so much that I really want to apply myself more to sharing that and giving that to other people. And that probably will mean making some more money than I make now. But that's driving.
I think so. That's how we connected. So for everyone that's listening to this right now, Karen and I, we connected on Clubhouse just a couple of weeks before recording this episode, and instantly when you were sharing sort of 30 seconds about the things that you've done, I was like, I've got to get you on the podcast and share some of your wisdom and your story. So yeah, again, thank you for being here.
Thank you for picking.
I want to talk about a few different things, and again, from some stuff that we were talking about offline. You've got your own opinion around head, heart, and gut, and the impact of having alignments there and the way that we move forward. So I'd love for you to share with the people that are listening or watching this right now a little bit about your theory on that side of things.
Well, I believe that we create our health and everything that happens to us by the way that we by our thoughts and by how that plays out in our emotions and our actions. And I know that when I was climbing the cliff and broke my back, that I was being extremely headstrong. You know, I remember now feeling scared before it, feeling uncertain, having this kind of weird feeling in my gut, but I'd never been taught about how to listen to my gut. And I just pushed ahead with my head, like, no, you can do this, kind of a bit ego driven, and then clearly fell off and broke my back. And I sometimes sort of pontificate whether having a broken, an injured spinal cord that's shifted to one side is about that disconnection that I've had between head and intuition. That's that headstrong approach to life, and then that more intuitive approach to life. So big journey for me in my life is about connecting much more with heart feelings and with my kind of intuition, and learning about all of that aspects of our ability to not only create in life but also flourish more and more with our health and our well-being. And I do believe that it's possible to heal a spinal cord only with kind of energies and release of lots of stuff that we've got trapped in there. And people probably think I'm crazy. Well, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, I ended up going to Brazil and being shocked open by a spirit surgeon, which was another kind of journey that I was seemed to be led on after reading a book. And it was a massive impact on my life. It completely changed my view and made me realize that we just live with the paradigms that we're brought up in, and other people in other parts of the world have completely different paradigms about what's possible. And that experience that I had in Brazil, even though I didn't get operated on by the spirit surgeon and suddenly start walking, it really made me believe that anything is possible. And we are just so limited in how much we truly know and understand. And I'm just so excited to just keep exploring that journey of what we can shift, what we can change, what we can create. And you're probably familiar with the work by Joe Dispenza and
very
others, Bruce Lipton and all that kind of work, where there's so many transformational things happening in people's health just through the power of connecting that thought energy with heart energy, and also kind of collapsing time and space and all these interesting topics which I'm fascinated by, and very much on an exploratory journey with myself, but don't profess to be any kind of expert.
Absolutely. I've become again, one of my sort of side hustles, if you like, from a learning perspective is in psychosomatics. And I've had her as a guest. She's on many times now on the show. A woman called Yvette Rose, who wrote a book called Metaphysical Anatomy. I say it's a book, it's a monster, that's sort of 800, 900 pages thick, about a lot of the root cause of any chronic illness or disease is emotional. There's structural elements that obviously impact, but it's amazing what can be done. I've had the miracle man Morris Goodman, who no doubt you've heard of. I've had him on the podcast as well, who was literally completely paralyzed, couldn't even blink his eye, or could only blink his eyes, and then literally weeks later was able to walk out of hospital. And that was back in 1981 that happened. But phenomenal, some phenomenal journeys of what people.
I think anything is possible, and we'll see where that goes.
So I want to touch on one thing, because you said that you've got some very strong beliefs, and in a moment I'm also going to ask you about some of your core beliefs that's enabled you to succeed, and some of the processes and habits that you have that have enabled you to do some incredible things. But you said that you've got a very strong opinion around negative thinking, and you also shared with me what you were thinking the night before your accident as well.
Yes, the night before I was paralyzed, I was out with some friends cycling bikes back from the pub. One of them had a loose mudguard. I told them a story about a family friend of ours who had a loose mudguard on his bike and went over the handlebars and ended up being paralyzed from the neck down. And then my exact words were, I can't imagine anything worse than being paralyzed. I'd rather be dead than paralyzed. And 12 hours later, I was. So I really believe strongly in the power of a single thought or a single word. And sometimes it's not always easy to be really conscious of the exact words that we're using. So I try to be really aware of what words I'm using. And I love working with other people when I'm coaching them and really kind of tuning into that language and what they're saying, and not just the energy behind it, but even into those specifics and the specific words. And I've got other examples, like in my racing career, where I've changed one word and it's had a huge impact on things. So there's lots of stories in there. I won't go into them all, but yeah, the power of language is immense.
So powerful. I mean, what you don't know is that part of our business is that we have a neurolinguistic programming training company. So we train people in neurolinguistic programming, which obviously language is a huge part of, neurolinguistic is literally in the word, the way that we communicate with ourselves, the language we use with ourselves, and the language that we use with other people makes such a difference. So
it's kind of like a secret. It's not a secret. It's pure access, isn't it, to the subconscious mind and what the beliefs are that are driving you. So, for example, I've got a great story that happened this last year. I'm training for the Tokyo Paralympics, and I'd noticed that for about the last 2 years, my right eye closes whenever I'm doing some hard effort, but couldn't get it to open. Couldn't get it to stay open. I'm like, this is crazy. It makes sense to have both my eyes open. Why can't I do it? And then, totally disconnected to this thought, I bumped into someone and they said, what's your mission at the minute? What are you training for? And I said, I've got one eye on Tokyo. And as I said the words, I was like, why did I say that? That's such a weird thing to say. And he immediately just looked at me and went, well, that's no good. You need both eyes on it. And I went, yeah, you're right. I rode home and I suddenly went, oh my God, one eye on Tokyo. I am closing one eye. What is this all about? And then I discovered this technique called brain spotting, which is a kind of advancement of EMDR stuff, where the idea that your visual field connects to your subconscious brain and traumas that are in there. And started doing some work with that. And after 2 sessions, my eye was open, never closed it since. I processed a lot of stuff, which was connected to, well, I don't need to go into it, but stuff that I didn't even know, recent traumas, but that connected back to other kind of family, ancestral stuff, all kinds of things. But it was like, wow, this is, so, there's so much in there that's can explode us into new possibilities if we can clear it out. It's so exciting.
It can do it for sure, and look, we could speak all evening, I'm sure, about this side of things. We've very much got a similar interest. For people that are listening to this right now that have been absolutely inspired by you, which no doubt they have, what would you say are some of your daily mantras, some of your core beliefs that sort of for you are just that's what you're constantly thinking, or some real practical stuff that enables you to continue pushing the boundaries that they could maybe adopt into their life? I'd love for you to share that, Karen.
Yeah, so, well, I suppose one of my mantras is ability is a state of mind, not a state of body. And actually that mantra has come to me after someone told me that disability is not a state of mind, not a state of body. And I'm like, this has got nothing to do with disability. This is just actually like, ability. And that's something I live by. I think the other one that the other mantra that I always remember, well, actually, it's just something I've learned to do naturally. I never really tried, but I've realized that I've become really good at it through maybe just the life I've lived, is just looking at things, to reframing things. So whenever you get bad news about something, I just flip it without even thinking. I'm just looking at what's good about this, or what could be good about this. And you probably know that story. I can't remember the story, but someone who, something bad happens and someone said, or something good happens and someone says, oh, that's amazing. And they go, maybe. And then something really bad happens and they're like, maybe. But I just like to flip it and see the potential upsides of everything. And there's a nice saying, isn't there? It's not about seeking out new landscapes. It's about seeing the same seeing the same landscape through new eyes. And I think if we can just shift that perspective as much as we can to make things feel and seem different, then that helps a lot. Absolutely.
Again, we could speak all evening about these sort of things and everything you've achieved. You mentioned that you once had one eye on Tokyo, which now that you then and you've obviously got some incredible achievements under your belt. What's next for you? What's a personal adventure that's in the short term that you're working on, and maybe more of a professional endeavor that you're working towards right now?
Yeah, so I've got both eyes on Tokyo, so that's one thing that's on the agenda for this year. If there's a Paralympic Games, we don't know whether it's going to be Olympics or Paralympics, so we'll see. But I also really believe that when something's out of our control, we just keep doing the best that we can. And I always do this thing where I'm kind of looking at having a conversation with my future self. So when the Olympics was cancelled last year, it's like, okay, well, if there is an Olympics next year, how will my future self feel if I'm not there? And it's like, yeah, if there is one, I want to be there. And it's like, and if you're there, how do you want to show up? And it's like, well, I don't want to show up as some super unfit, off form. So come on, let's just keep going and get on with it. So that's one. And then I won the 79th medal for Britain in Rio. It was a gold medal, and 79, I'd forgotten until someone pointed out to me, is the elemental number of gold. Do you remember the periodic table from chemistry? Mm-hmm. So 79 basically represents gold. And I started a project after Rio called Quest 79. So my personal quest is to raise 79,000 for a charity, the Spinal Injuries Association. And I've been cycling across 7 continents in 9 rides. So basically Rio, 1 on each continent, and then a land speed record in America that I did. So that's all done. And I've got 1 continent left, which is Antarctica. And in the middle of this journey, I discovered that 79 degrees latitude and longitude is in Antarctica. And it intersects there. And I never really could work out what I wanted to do in Antarctica. It's like, well, people just go to the South Pole just to pay loads of money and go there, but I'm not really that interested. And it's like, that's it. I need to go to this point. So the plan is to go to this point in Antarctica and create a new pole called the Pole of Possibility, which is all about encouraging people to find their inner gold. So over the last few years, people have been getting involved in doing their own little projects, which could be anything from something they do for 79 minutes a day to something they do for 79 days. But there's been like all sorts of just amazing things happening, like kids climbing 79 mountains, crossing 79 miles of Scotland, raising money for charities. At the moment, someone's putting 79 love letters out into their local town, which is actually someone I met on Clubhouse. And I just think it's so cool that they're putting these random love letters around their town. And so there's just this kind of movement with Quest 79, and I'm talking about it's all about find your inner gold. And it's not a business, it's just the passion I've got to kind of spread those ripples of goodness that we spread when we do those kinds of things. So yeah, that's a big project. And meanwhile, I've been inspired by Clubhouse and all the work that I've done, and finally kind of being in one place with COVID, and decided to actually get into doing more coaching work and creating programs for people to do, which is what I love, to finally share all this combination of knowledge and experience. So if it helps people somewhere in the world, I'll be happy.
Love that. Karen, you are and have been an incredible guest, and I'll definitely look forward to having you on the show again in the not too distant future. Thank you so much.
No, thank you so much, Will, for picking me up in Clubhouse and inviting me along. It's a pleasure to be here with you. So I'm going to be I'm gradually working my way through some of your podcasts, but I've got plenty to go yet. So
yeah, there's a fair few to get through. So if for people that have just been thinking about, I need to find out more about this woman, I want to connect with her, I want to follow her, which I always think is a bit of a weird thing to say, but they want to find out, where can they find you?
My website is karendarke.com, so Karen with a K, DARKE, and my Instagram is @handbikedarke. You can find me out there, or you can follow me from my website on the channels, and there's links there to Quest 79 as well if anyone wants to get involved in doing a little bit of stretching yourself, getting out of your comfort zone and finding a bit of your own inner gold.
Amazing. Well, look, we'll put the link in the comments so people can get access to that. It's a link in the not in the comments, in the description, so people can get access to that. Thank you so much. It's been incredible to have you as a guest. For everyone that's been listening, until next time, make it happen.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Make It Happen with Will Polston podcast. Make sure you join Will's free Facebook group, the Make It Happen community. Please support the show by subscribing on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, SoundCloud, or Google Play. Share this episode with at least one friend you think would benefit from it, and give Will a 5-star review wherever you download your podcasts. Until next time, make it happen.